Hey, this is Joe Mastriona, better known as Joe M., co-host of Life After Fame podcast, with my best friend Joe Boglino, better known as Joe B. Yep, we're the two Joes. Thanks for being here today. If you've already subscribed to the show, thank you so much. If you're here for the first time, make sure you subscribe to the show because today, like in every episode, we're bringing you the most amazing transformational stories of former pro athletes, coaches, musicians, and actors. Let's do this.
Welcome to Life After Fame podcast. Just imagine 70,000 fans cheering your name when you've scored the winning touchdown. Imagine standing on stage looking out at the crowd, rocking out to that chart-busting song you created. The applause and recognition you received for your masterful acting performance in that latest blockbuster movie. And then, one day, the cheering stops. This podcast is all about catching up with these stars of yesterday to find out where they're at now and who they are as people, beyond the stardom. This is a true human interest podcast about the people we loved to root for. And now, your hosts, Joe Mastriona and Joe Boglino.
Life After Fame's guest this week is no other guest we've had before on our show. We interview a former rock star and lead singer of Opie Gone Bad, Jake Schroeder. Jake and his bandmates had a very successful 20-year run and was long considered Colorado's best band. Jake has experienced a lot of transitions from rock star to national anthem extraordinaire, belting out over 1,000 anthems for the Colorado Avalanche. Jake has been very successful in lots of different endeavors, and in this episode, we uncover Jake's heart and passion for giving back, along with his struggles and triumphs within his own career transitions throughout his life. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Life After Fame podcast with our guest, Jake Schroeder.
Hey, I'm Joe B., and today we welcome Jake Schroeder to Life After Fame Spotlight. Welcome to the gig here. Jake, it's nice to have you.
Thanks for having me, yeah.
So Jake, we'd love to start out with, reverse engineer. What juices you today? Because you've been involved in so many different cool things throughout your life, but what is really juicing you today? What's your passion?
Sure. Sometimes if I'm having a rough time, I really have to kind of grab myself by the short hairs and go, dude, stop. You played Red Rocks 9 times and you sang the anthem and you got to do pretty much everything you ever wanted to do. You're healthy. Depending on who you ask, relatively intelligent. So just stop with the self-pity stuff. And that's a hard one sometimes. What's really doing it for me now is we kind of stumbled into this through our love of World War II history and the men that were in Europe. And I've got just a pretty unique thing because they're still revered here in Europe. These men that freed the continent. And it's a great story. And it's not all, there's some warts on it, right? But it's a really fantastic story of American sacrifice to do right. And so I think that's a pretty powerful thing to get to have as a guidepost. So we've kind of stumbled into this thing where it went from escorting World War II vets over here and getting to be friends with some of those guys and really being part of their emotional transition. A lot of them were coming over here to get some closure so that they can move on. And it was pretty pronounced. So it's not just that. It's now these kids that, particularly these underserved kids, they think of France as like something out of a Disney movie. It's not a real place,
right,
where people walk around and say bonjour to each other. And then they get the lesson and they see the reverence in the eyes of these people here for the men that came here 78 years ago. And it's powerful for them. And so to see that take place and to help them on this journey for them to accomplish something pretty radical. Right? This isn't going to Disneyland or saving up some money and going to Mexico or, whatever. This is going to France. A lot of these kids have never been on an airplane before and certainly haven't ever traveled anywhere out of the country before. And they're going without their parents for the first time. Yeah. So to be part of something like that where they're just totally overwhelmed by how wonderful people are to hear to them. And then also the stories. It's really easy to reach these kids. You can kind of pierce the teenagerness of these kids with how powerful these stories are about these men that were just absolute heroes and sacrificed. And that was not to achieve any personal wealth or anything like that, or It was to free them from tyranny. And it's a really big deal, and it's still really poignant.
You know, about 30 years ago, I went with my dad to the beaches of Normandy. So he was in the Korean War, but I remember looking at him and watching him. So he was just a late teenager, or actually early teenager when he went through the war, and the effects it had on him and walking those beaches. I also had a chance to go to Gallipoli with a couple of Australians back in 92 to Turkey. And, you know, Jake, there are still bones that litter the beaches. And I think what you're doing is great because I feel like there's a lot of, because of our geography, kids are insulated from the rest of the world and they need to be exposed. The more we can expose kids, we can awaken the senses, have them understand and be grateful for what they have, but is also understand different cultures and that kind of thing. How did you get into this? Because from the profile, if someone was just to Google you and look at you generally, like, how did he make this into the D-Day Leadership Academy? This is a funk jam band lead singer. And where was the bridge there? How did you get involved in such a
I've always been a nerd, right? So I wanted to tell you something. I wear readers. And so these are progressive glasses. So the prescription's at the bottom. So every time I'm on a Zoom, I always feel like I'm looking down my nose at people. But it's the only face I can see. So if it seems like I'm taking on a snooty personality, it's just a glass.
You're really not. You're just trying to see.
I'm walking around with readers on my head, like 24/7 like this, and they're breaking it. And I was like, all right, I'll just get glasses. So where that came from is I've always been pretty patriotic, very patriotic. My father was very patriotic and was impressed upon us at an early age that was very important to us. We learned it from our family. And I was also a giant nerd, and I loved studying history. I read Rise and Fall of the Third Reich for an 8th grade book report, and some of these other kids were reading, Bob Goes to Football Game or whatever it was. And that's not because I was a tremendous scholar, because I was not. I was a dumbass and often did the very least possible, like no homework and then just acing tests or kind of getting through it and really kind of selling myself short in that way. But I've always really loved the history of World War II, particularly in Europe. Made dioramas and stuff like a nerdy kid would do and built models when I was a kid. And then I got to know a guy that ran a charity out of Denver who took veterans back because they'd come out on the carpet with me when I do the anthem. And so he eventually used me as a volunteer, and I ended up doing the medical for these guys when they would go to Europe, doing D-Day stuff and doing Battle of the Bulge stuff. It's been around for 50 years. And their primary function for most of those 50 years was doing athletic leagues for inner city kids with cops as their coaches. And so that kind of morphed over the years, and we ran a baseball and a big football league. And then in 2019, former Chief Paul Pazin decided he wanted to run for mayor or whatever he was going to do and pulled the cops out of PAL so he could do his own signature community programming. And that didn't really go very well. That was 2019. So we all know what's happened since then. So we just pivoted because early on I was like, the cops that I know, because the veterans would open up to police officers and would open up to other veterans or current military much more than they would open up just to me asking them about stuff. And so I learned most of the stuff I learned by being around them and listening.
Similar experiences, right? A cop might, not always, but has similar experiences with some pretty traumatic
Absolutely.
Like those veterans that we can't even understand.
They're very respectful guys, and they also realize that these police officers oftentimes have to make split-second decisions that can very greatly affect the lives of all sorts of people around them. So I think that's kind of where they bonded a little bit. And so that was really great. And then I was like, I'm going to bring kids too. So I started bringing kids from St. Rose, DPS, and we would just rent a house near here. And we're kind of in the western sector, the American sector of D-Day stuff. So our building now is in Sainte-Mère-Église, and we would rent this chateau. And I use that word pretty loosely because it was pretty cool. And it was amazing, but it was pretty beat. And it was dank and damp and not very comfortable. And the beds were old and really ratty, but it was cool because we were here. And so I started bringing kids. And then in 2017, this house was brought to my attention. It had been on the market for 2 years when we bought it. So we bought this building, and it sleeps up to about 26 people if we need to, and has a great big backyard, and it's in Sainte-Mère-Église. I'm 150 steps from the church where the mannequin is year-round of John Steele.
Wow.
We are right in the thick of things here. And so that's kind of where we got to with this, I realized. And then as we brought more and more kids over here, I'm like, this is so fantastic in so many ways that I never thought of. Because it's not just the history part of it that the kids love, and it's not just the that part, because some kids really dig they watch Band of Brothers and they watch the movies and they love that part. But now what I'm starting to see is I'm seeing like young girls, like these female students we have that are 12, 13, 14 years old who are respectful of the history, but none of them really learn that much in school anymore. They don't teach the history of World War II very much at all. They get such a powerful multicultural experience out of it. Yeah. And they're so respectful of listening to the history that it provides this really unique experience. And then they pay for their own airfare for two reasons. One is so that they have some skin in the game, right? So if you don't keep your grades up, your parents are going to not help you with this thing, right? And then also the main reason is so they have a metric, right? So I did 10 bake sales and 4 car washes and I helped do trash clean. I got to buy a plane ticket to go to Europe. Right. So they know that can be done. They know that can be achieved. So that's a really, really powerful piece of this now that's kind of turned into, for me, a lot of the main piece of it. These kids that just don't conceive going somewhere like this. And then we teach them about leadership. Hopefully some of it sticks.
So let's talk a little bit about that. You have programs for kids, and I think you also have programs for corporate people. What's the curriculum look like, and what's a core lesson that you're finding as it evolves that the message that you're teaching is becoming one core element? Can you share that a little bit?
Sure. So I'll talk about, we have 5 key elements that are basically character and ethical traits of the greatest generation. And we teach those 5 elements to whether they're business people or students or whoever comes. And we demonstrate that with a story. So one of the ones that we teach, these are all leadership elements, right, that you'll use in school or in business or whatever. And so one of the lessons is empathy. So there are a couple different places we take them to teach them the lesson about empathy and we ask them how that particular story demonstrates empathy to them. So one of them is Waverly Woodson Jr., who is a African-American medic with the 320th Barrage Balloon Battalion. They had to have all black units in World War II because President Woodrow Wilson resegregated the military and got this Army War College report that was just terrible. That said, the blacks, only 23% of them can follow orders, and it was the most horribly racist thing ever. And yet these guys fought for, they're like, what other country are we going to fight for? So this man was dropped out of medical school to join up. He was trained as an officer in an anti-aircraft battalion. And then they were like, well, he's going to end up commanding white guys. We can't have that. So let's put him in the Barrage Balloon Battalion as a medic. So he's there with all these other African Americans. His LCT gets hit on the way into Omaha Beach on the first wave. So he's hit by shrapnel. He swims in with 2 other guys, finds a tent, sets it up on Omaha Beach, and saves the lives of about 300 GIs between the time he got on the beach and the next day when he collapsed on June 7th. And he lived, but he was recommended for the Medal of Honor at that time and went to the White House and everything. Yeah. So his widow is still pursuing that Medal of Honor, which just boggles my mind.
That's amazing.
That the president doesn't just do that. The guy could use a win. Just do this. Like this is such a
what does it take to give him that win?
Don't understand it. But so why did this guy and the blacks were treated so horribly in training? They were treated horribly when they were deployed to England by the American soldiers. The Brits were like, what are you guys doing? Are these your countrymen? Like they couldn't. So a lot of these British families adopted the black soldiers and stayed in touch with them after the war because they couldn't be, the pubs would have different black, white nights at their pubs just so that they wouldn't have all these fights all the time because the white soldiers were so awful to the African Americans. So this guy demonstrates empathy by saving the lives of 300 white GIs on D-Day. Guys that had probably been awful to him.
Yeah, treated him like shit.
Saved their lives at great cost to himself. So that's a pretty easy empathy lesson that we teach.
And forgiveness, an easy by the way. Wow, forgiveness.
A lot of things, and I don't know that he necessarily forgave people. For a lot of the African American soldiers that I've spoken to who said, when I got home, I put my uniform away and I never wanted to look at it again.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And I don't blame him. One of the side projects we're working on is with a fantastic sculptor. His name is Ed Dwight. He lives in Denver, and he was the first black astronaut. And he is the preeminent African-American history sculptor. And so he's working on a monument. There are no monuments here in Normandy for the African-American soldiers. Wow. And they played a huge role in the invasion and the success of the European theater. So we are going to try and raise the money and build in place the first monument to black soldiers here in Normandy on Omaha Beach. So that's a side project that we're kind of working on. And
very cool.
And really trying to get that done so that these kids can come see. A lot of these families have grandparents or great uncles or whatever that served here. And they're not in Private Ryan. They're not in Band of Brothers. They're not in any of the movies, but they were here. They unloaded every ship. They had the Red Ball Express, which was every piece of equipment until we took Antwerp, landed at Cherbourg and had to be driven as fast as the trucks could go, as long as the guys could stay awake, as long as they could keep going. 30 hours to the front, unloaded, drove it straight back. And it was this marathon. And that happened for a long time, like almost till the end of the week. So that stuff I think it's important that we honor that stuff.
Totally.
So it doesn't take away from any of the heroism of the stuff you know about, but it's really important that we get it.
You're passionate about this and you're doing what I would call heart work. And we love that. This is a big part of this show is, like we talked about, transitions, and we all go through those and finding our heart work and that passion. I love everything you're saying about what you're doing and how that is helping the community as well as our young people. I agree 100%. Bringing someone over to France. I've been over to Europe. And before that, I didn't have a chance before I was an adult to go to Europe. There was never that opportunity. And so you hear about these things, just this magical thing called Europe. And it's like something like Disneyland, because I felt like at times it really didn't truly exist. And you get over there and then you start getting into the history and you really do develop this sense than anybody you could ever get in a book or in a lecture, because you're there, you're touching it, you're seeing it, you're talking to actual people. How do people get more information on this project that you're doing so that we can get it out there to our listeners and our audience?
Sure. It's ddayleadershipacademy.com, and they can go there and learn about what we're doing and certainly reach out to us and contact us. But it's kind of a one-man show. It's just me that works here now. I've got a great board. It's been super helpful. We're moving forward on this thing and hope to get this going again. And then hope to now, Denver's new police chief is a guy that really is invested in the community. Ron Thomas, Chief Thomas, and he's a guy that I would love to work with more in the future. And I've worked with him a lot in the past. And people in Denver don't realize how lucky they are to have him as a chief. He's he's one of the quiet, like you could know him for a couple of years and I'd say 2 or 3 words to the guy. And he is brilliant. He's a brilliant guy. And he's really going to do everything he can to make Denver a safer city. So I'm looking forward to doing more work with him too.
That program as well is very important because it is dear to my heart. I grew up in North Denver and I played on a couple PAL teams for baseball and football. And I remember that program and what they did for me as a kid. That's an amazing program. I'm still glad that it's going on and that you're behind it.
Sure.
Yeah, this is awesome. Now, let me pivot a little bit with you. I don't know what song this is from Opie Gone Bad, but you sing, "Pick Up My Soul and Move On." I dig that lyric. We've all been in situations where we've had to pick up our soul and move on. Recently, I think when you get into your 50s, you've definitely had to move on from things. But you've had a couple of long-term professional relationships, engagements that you've moved on from, whether it's been the band, whether it's been the Avalanche after 25 years of singing the anthem. Can you talk about what brought you to the decision that said, hey, man, I got to move on. I got to pick up my soul, move on? And how did you handle those steps away from something that probably was comfortable because you were so used to it? And I think we get that way with things that we've done for a long time, but sometimes they don't serve us either. And that's the wicked piece about comfort. We all fight for it, but then when we get to it, we get sedentary, we get lazy, we don't grow. And before you know it, 30 years have passed you. So you've had a couple of professional engagements here recently that you've just decided to kind of make a difference. Can you talk about those a little bit?
Sure. Leaving the band was easy for me. The difficult part of leaving the band was leaving the guys in the band, because they're wonderful human beings, really amazing human beings, and they were my family. So that was hard, but it was just not really where I wanted to be, what I wanted to be doing anymore. And I had a tremendous guilt because I realized that those guys live and die to play music. And that's why they're as good as they are, because they absolutely, and there was a time in my life when I was the same way, but it passed. So I was getting real sedentary. I wasn't writing and I wasn't, it's kind of not wanting to play that much. And everybody's like, do you miss it? I'm like, I drive down Broadway and I look at the clubs. I'm like, no. No, it was great when I was a kid, and it was great when I was
Herman's Hideaway and those places.
Yeah, like being around at 3:30.
Red Rocks too is amazing.
We were so lucky, right? I mean, we got to do that so many times, and it was really. It was like I said, no complaints, and it was wonderful. And the guys were really the key to that. Was my family for a long time, and I still have nothing but love for those men. Really amazing people. But that was easy for me because that was like it was just time. 20 years is enough. And then the anthem was something that I did it for I got 1,000 games in November of last year. And, it's 25 years of planning my life around the NHL
Around the
schedule.
game.
That's a free gig. So that's a lot of snowstorms to drive in through and a lot of ice storms, a lot of time missed with my kids. And so, it was definitely time. There were some things that happened over there that I think it was just kind of made it much easier for me to go, this is a great time for me to retire. Right. So
is it kind of tough
okay.
though, now that you have that time now? And I guess you've really filled it with what you're doing now, but I mean, true.
No, this is wonderful to have, to be able to do stuff like we talked about, going to Bastogne and doing things like this when I would really, I planned my life around the NHL schedule for half of it. And I'm not doing that anymore.
And to do it for free is amazing.
Well,
I never imagined that would be a free gig, Jake. There's in my wildest dreams, I never would have thought you would say that. No, that's shocking. I'm sorry to me that they didn't pay you and that many times, 1,000 times.
It was okay. I agreed to do it. So I loved hockey.
Sure.
I loved being around it. And so I got 2 really good tickets, really good seats for the game. And that was fine. That was cool. I certainly am not a victim. I was real happy about getting to be there and getting to be part of it. And it was fun, like the guys that when they won the cup in 2001 when I was there were my contemporaries. These guys are mostly my age, right? And now, the kids that won last year those guys are younger than some of my kids, right?
No
so
doubt.
So it was good. It was a good, it was a good time. It was a big adjustment, and it was hard not being there for the playoffs, but it was the right decision. And I was real proud of it. And at the same time, just very grateful, especially to the fans, people that came to those games, and the things that people would say to me. I can't imagine how I got so lucky as to get to be part of those lives and to have them be part of mine. I really, really felt very lucky. And I did 1,000 games. Like, what am I going to do? Another 1,000 games and go out there in the locker and go to the bathroom in my pants or whatever. It's another 1,000 games.
Right?
Isn't going to be pretty for anybody, So it was
isn't that one thing about what you want to do as a singer is you want to affect lives. You want to leave an impact, inspire, or just leave them with an impression. And you use that song. You sung it so well. I was at a couple of games and like, man, that dude has got a voice. Seriously. It's interesting how maybe that impact that you made wasn't something that you thought when you first started your band and started your singing career.
No, not at all. My first anthem was for the Nuggets in 1985 when I was a junior in high school. And I did the Nuggets for a while, and then just kind of fell into the Avs thing when they looked for a full-time person in their third year here. They wanted someone. And I had done, I think, 2 or 3 Avs games to that point in the first 2 years they were here. But I was like, okay, and it was just kind of another thing, and it fell right into what I was doing with Opie, and they were both kind of headliner gigs or whatever. And then after I stopped doing Opie in 2012, it was, then I realized many people knew me for the anthem that had no idea that I was in a band. And that was, so that kind of was a cool transition. But, I tell people, and I'm not kidding, like there are 1,000 people that can sing better than I can in Denver. Like there are a lot of people that live within blocks of the Pepsi Center or Ball Arena that are much, much better than I am. It wasn't because I was the best singer, but I was consistent, and I sang that song from my heart every single time I ever sang. And that's
very obvious.
I can hang my hat on.
So talk to us, Jake, about that time spent, 25 years. You've seen lots of players come and go, executives come and go, coaches come and go. Talk to us about what you saw, because you really actually had a pretty cool, what I would maybe call a ringside seat, where the general public doesn't have that with these guys, where they're going through their careers and then they do ultimately have that transition as well, which is 30,000 people screaming, at them, they're getting the adrenaline rush, coming out of the tunnel, and then one day it's gone.
Yeah.
What type of transition have you seen with those guys?
Those guys, not everybody's Joe Sakic where they get this great big video thing and they walk in and they raise their banner up and it's just, and it was him retiring. They would have kept him, almost everybody, like literally almost everybody else that's ever retired from the team ends it by being cut or by being told you're not wanted anymore, right? Or you're not good enough. And also for these guys, there's a tremendous structure that's been in place in your life since you were probably 4 years old. And a lot of these guys that play in the NHL, their parents drive them 2 hours to practice every morning at 4 a.m. before school. And 2 hours, it's literally talking to guys like Cody McLeod, who's a good buddy of mine, and some of these other guys, like the level of commitment that their parents had to have to get these guys just to play hockey, up in Canada. And from all over the world is just ridiculous. It's amazing. And my little hammerhead nephew plays youth hockey, travel hockey now too. So I see
Okay.
the expense and
You
the
see
level
it
of
firsthand.
effort that they have to put in. And that's still not much compared to what these guys up in Canada do. So when they all of a sudden are told they're not wanted, and then at the same time, it's like a trap door on a hangman's platform, like, okay, you have no structure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nobody wants you,
What are
and
you
you
gonna
have
do
no
now? This is
structure.
all
For the
you were
first
doing.
time
And go
since
figure
you
it out.
were prepubescent, right? What are you going to do? The stuff that those guys go through is really dark and really hard, and some of them handle it just fine,
Yeah.
and some of them
Sure.
don't. A lot of them really don't and really struggle. And so, you know, I get to be around guys like Quincy, I love that guy dearly. He's a good buddy of mine, and I think he's a really remarkable human being too.
Yeah.
And I love what he's doing. He is driven to help guys through that dark period after they get done,
Yeah.
because those
Love
are
him
just
as
men,
well.
right? Those are men,
Just men.
and you know,
Yeah.
it's hard to ask for help as a man. I have a hard time with it, and even though I probably have asked for help more in the last 5 years than I ever did. I mean, God, if I could have done that in my 20s,
I know,
you know,
right?
a huge thing. Guys need to know that it's okay to have these moments where you are just bare and you're
Yes.
like,
Yes.
I don't know what to do. I feel I'm broken and I need help. And
Yeah.
it's, you know, and
I'm going through a tough situation.
I still struggle doing that sometimes, although I'm better at it now. I had a real tough year this year.
Yeah.
I had a really difficult year this year. I had some deaths of people close to me. I had some stuff at work that was really hard. You know, the transition from the Avalanche was very difficult. And I had a really rough year, and I'm coming out of it now, but I certainly have had to ask for a lot of help.
If you look at it, Jake,
Yeah.
because of what we talk about here is we call it the pearl that drops out of the poop. So it's the good that comes out of the bad. And the important lesson is, we can all think about something that happened 20 years ago and go, that was a terrible time, but I'm better for it. What we try to talk about is, can you go through the tough time and at the time you're going through it, recognize the good that's coming out of it, because it can help you. Is there, if you look at this year, is there anything that you can point to? Okay, this was a rough year, but this is the good that came out of it. Is there anything like
all
that
of
for
it,
you?
right? But to do it at the time is, I don't know anybody. Maybe
tough.
some of the old guys I know are zen enough to do that. It's time for my wife to go, and it was I still can't do that. I have to break it down and say, this is not up to me. I am not in control. And I have to understand that very
go
clearly.
is important,
Yep.
right?
I have to let it go on for me. And I don't know who God is, and I don't know what that plan is. So I'm just going to put one foot in front of the other and just get this done, because at some point this will make sense to me, and something I do feel very strongly that whatever is happening, something much better is going to come out of it. Even if, as long as you're honest about it and you look at what your part in the conflict is, or whatever it is, so you look at your responsibility to it. And my big one is just not beating the shit out of myself. I mean, I'm real good at that. I'm just now at 54 learning how to not annihilate myself every time I'm a problem.
You know what?
I'm not very good at it.
Right there with you. Right there with
Is
you.
if your best friend treated you the way you treat yourself, you probably wouldn't be friends with them, because we do that. We hold ourselves to such standards. We have achievements and we don't acknowledge them, and then we just kick the shit out of ourselves for whatever. And maybe that's the pearl that's come out of some of this, is some of that more realization of that. Hey, man, nothing wrong with being your own fan. Even though it doesn't feel right.
Also, I think, Jake, too, what you said earlier is a huge and important point that I want our audience to definitely hear. This is that you said you reached out. You reached out this year to community, to others, and said, hey, I need help. I really want to hammer this point, because this is a big part about our podcast, Life After Fame. It initially started with curiosity, like Joe said, and then we started to delve deeper into it, to the human experience, and saying, hey, they're just like the rest of us. They were superheroes, or they were guys on the stage, rocking it out. But at the end of the day, we all still have the same problems, same struggles. And let's at least highlight those, understand how you guys got through them, so that the rest of us can also relate and realize, hey, if these guys can get through it, we can get through it, and especially as men, because like you said, we are not taught. Talk about our emotions, suck it up, stop whining, don't say anything. And I think a lot of us are figuring out that's an old paradigm that needs to be shifted.
That's why guys died when they're 60, right? That's why guys died so young, because they kept all that stuff inside them, or they drank themselves to death, or, my dad died when he was 51. I've already outlived him by 4 years or 3 years. And my grandfather died when he was 49. It really meant a lot to talk to Adam Foote after he was done, because Adam is a guy that I've always admired, really liked him. His father and his grandfather were both cops in Toronto. And that's a tough life for those guys. And Adam is as tough as they come. Right?
Yeah.
Yes, he is.
And I remember having this long conversation with him where he's like, I'm finally feeling better now. But it was real dark for a long time.
It's tough.
And so to have somebody that tough tell me that gave me a lot of hope. Right, gave me a ton of hope going, I'm not as tough as the corn and Footer's crap. So it's okay for me to not feel great.
That's right.
So I think this podcast is great for people that are like, wait, Quincy's a big dude and he's a 3 handicap and he played in the NHL for 12 years and he had a hard time. Right.
Yeah.
Like maybe that's okay to hear something unexpected come out of these guys.
Hey man, it's absolutely okay. And that's the whole point of it, is you get these gladiators who we all think that they are, but we're all people. And, we need each other. And, for guys, the realization is really important. And Jake, we really appreciate your time. It's been great to get to know you on this and to get you familiar with our audience here. Applaud what you're doing with kids. And I think the exposing of these kids and our future to what you're doing is so important. You're probably doing more good than you even think you are. But when we look at you, now we don't know anything, we can't compare, but you look pretty happy, pretty good, like you're doing some good work that's feeding your soul. And we're happy.
Like we said, hard work. Yeah. Love that for you. As far as we're concerned, that's what we feel like we're doing here with this podcast is we're jumping into hard work. Man, it means everything. That's so important. So thank you for sharing your hard work with us, because that means a lot. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. It was my pleasure. Thanks very much.
We want to thank Jake Schroeder for hanging out with us from his place in northern France to talk about his D-Day Leadership Academy, his time as a frontman for Opie Gone Bad, and the time he spent as the national anthem singer for the Colorado Avalanche over the last 2 decades. If you're interested in more information about what Jake is doing with D-Day Leadership Academy, you can check out ddayleadershipacademy.com and contact him through that page to inquire about his corporate and student leadership programs and sightseeing tours he offers of northern France and the beaches of Normandy. Thanks again to all of our Life After Fame members for listening to our show. You guys really are appreciated. Life After Fame is a human interest podcast about the transitions we all face in life, and it shines a spotlight on people that have achieved extraordinary success and how they've made a pivot from the spotlight to being out of it. We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you haven't done so already, make sure you hit subscribe to find out about previous episodes and exciting new ones coming out. Please visit us at lifeafterfamenow.com or by subscribing anywhere podcasts are found. Join us next week as we take a deep dive into our next guest transition and story of their life after fame. On behalf of this episode's guest, Jake Schroeder, I'm Joe Boglino with my co-host Joe Mastriona. And just remember, if you're going through a transition in your life, you're not alone anymore with Life After Fame podcast. We'll see you next week.